of the slain soldiers' bodies in Dover, Delaware on Friday. And that is where we start this hour with founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and host of the Independent Americans podcast, Paul Rieckhoff. Also joining us, the CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Allison Jaslow, is here. And writer-at-large for The Bulwark and MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller. Paul, no parent wants to receive that call. Talk to me about what we watched, the importance of the way that President Biden comported himself on that call.
What that family is experiencing is unimaginable. But Joe Biden's one of the rare people that can kind of imagine it. You know, he's at his best when the moments are at their darkest. He's been a consoler-in-chief for this country since before he was president, but he's also the only commander-in-chief we've had since 9/11 that had a child in combat. Bo is in combat. He knows what it's like to watch the news and fear the worst, and he knows what it's like to fear that call. So I think in this very harsh and horrible moment, he can connect with them in a personal way that no president has done since 9/11. And you can see that on the faces of the family. They know he knows what it's like, and that's incredibly powerful.
And he also put context, right? The idea of 1% that protects the 99% of us.
Yeah, and that's what it's been for over 20 years. It's been a small group of people continuing to sacrifice over and over again. And now it's going to beg the difficult policy question, which is, why were they killed? What happens next? What's going to be the response? And that's going to be an even more difficult task. And now it's forced upon him that he's got to have a conversation with the American people, maybe in a more strategic way, about Iran. How is Iran involved, and how are we going to hope to achieve some kind of justice for that family and for others?
Your point about understanding sacrifice and the way that can come from lived experience. It can come from a reverence for the institution or an absence thereof.
Yeah, I first met Joe Biden over 20 years ago when he was a senator, and we knew he cared. I spent a day at Arlington with then Vice President Biden and a group of other people, and I remember having a conversation with him and Jill Biden. I mean, they get it. They understand it. They've been there. They've been there for a long time. And I think you can criticize President Biden in a lot of ways, but he's a good man. And anyone who's been around him, who's been in a room, especially in the difficult situations, understand he's a man of character. And that is what I think sets him apart from his competition in this presidential race. And I think it's one of his most important attributes and one of America's most important attributes. He represents the best of us in that moment, when he's compassionate, when he shows his integrity, and when he really cares.
You alluded to the decisions that are forthcoming for this administration, and I wonder if the stakes being as high as they are, if it crystallizes in the eyes of service members, of their families, the decision, which is we often think about the President of the United States as in his legislative capacity as overseeing Congress, but when you think about specifically the role of commander-in-chief, I have to imagine that moments like this just make it that much sharper.
I hope so. I mean, it's a clear differentiator. I mean, you need a commander-in-chief who has character, who has integrity, who cares about people, who has some strategic vision, who can bring people together, not a national security threat that's an egomaniac and a threat to the global security. I mean, there's a very clear contrast here, and maybe people will come back to that in this moment, and I think they should. I think especially independent voters that I talk to a lot are looking for integrity and character and stability, and I think these are the type of moments that can influence a couple hundred, couple thousand people that may go one way toward Biden when they were thinking about going another direction when November comes.
I mean, to say he was wrong is a little bit of an understatement there, Paul, but let's go to the caution about a second term. Pretty alarming stuff.
Yes. I mean, President Mayhem 2.0 is alarming, especially given the state of affairs in the world that we just covered and you cover every single week. I mean, Trump is the #1 national security threat for America. I think we've been talking about it on this show for years. Insiders are recognizing it, but I also think America's starting to recognize it. I mean, the stakes are different this time, and I think New Hampshire is a bit of a caution for Trump. You saw independents in particular leave him and go to Nikki Haley. I think that will reflect in the general election in November as well, when independents look at this global landscape and they say, we need stability, we need a calm head, we need someone who's not reckless and potentially collaborating with dictators. I may not like Biden, but he's better than that. I think this is starting to add up on him, and I think it's going to hurt him in the general significantly.
Opted to work for someone he knew had those sympathies. Why not interview experts on authoritarianism who did not work for authoritarians? That is also a plug on my part to buy Ruth Ben-Ghiat's book, Strong Men from Mussolini to the Present. I think implicit in there, though, is this question of, will anyone listen, right? Are there Republicans who will listen to a John Bolton because he did serve in the administration?
Yes. I think there are. And folks think there may be no more reasonable Republicans, but they are out there. And there are moderates, and there are young people who are voting for the first time, and there are independents that are 49% of the country right now that tend to focus on national security issues and tend to consider themselves patriots. And if you can just move a couple thousand of them in Ohio and other key swing states, that may be the difference in who the next commander-in-chief is. So I do think you have to double down on that. At the same time, you've got the sycophants falling in line. You've got DeSantis and the others who we now see are just going to fall in line behind him and give him that momentum. So, yes, I don't think you give up the fight on that middle, because the middle is the key battle zone in all of this.
Equally safe or unsafe under either a Trump or a Biden presidency, that would seem to undermine the credibility of his argument.
Yes. I mean, I'm not, putting personally a lot of stake in what John Bolton says, but I think there are some people who are moved by him. And I think the question is, can the Democrats and can all those forces that oppose Trump weaponize it in some way? We talked on this show in months past about Chris Christie. Could he take chunks out of Trump over time? Trump is like Godzilla, rampaging our future and rampaging our democracy. So I think it's right that we have to align every opponent to him to try to take him down. And if you can take little pieces off of his voting base, if you can take pieces away from his earned media, if you can take pieces away from his electoral votes, you got to do it, because the margin may be so small that that's the difference.
Paul Reichhoff, Ian Millhiser, thank you both so much for spending some time with us. Paul's latest podcast with retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, it drops tomorrow. You do not want to miss it.